What's good? It's Woog. I just wanted to give an immediate reaction to Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano and Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevenson. We'll start with Taylor Serrano, where Katie Taylor wins a split decision in what could be considered the fight of the year, potentially rivaling even Lee Wood versus Michael Conlan, that took place a couple of months ago. I mean, is it hyperbole or an exaggeration for me to consider that this might be in contention with that for fight of the year? Look, this was already kind of billed as the greatest women's fight of all time, matchups wise. And this is before they even enter the ring, just because of the accolades earned by both fighters. So you get into the ring. This is at the Madison Square Garden, huge scale. Jake Paul's involved in the co-promotion with Eddie Hearn. So Jake's backing Serrano. Eddie's got Katie Taylor. And because of the stakes and the magnitude of the fight, I was just hoping that the fight delivered in the ring as much as the buildup was generating interest for the fight. Because often at times with a lot of the fights that end up being crossover sensations, you start to inform your, casual fans, the ones who aren't, into stuff week in and week out. Okay, no, you want to check this one out, And so when you get casual fans and just non-hardcore boxing fans to get invested into a fight, and then it ends up being a little bit of a dud in the ring, that just feels very unfortunate. It's like, damn, I wish that one just delivered a little bit more action. And I could have enjoyed the fight, in a lot of these cases, because I enjoy the sweet, sciencey aspects of some of the more technical fights. But I also know that that doesn't necessarily transition into what most people would be into if they're coming in to watch a fight with little knowledge or background in terms of what's actually transpiring in the ring that might not be so obvious to the naked eye. Well, Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano delivered on all fronts. This was an absolute action-packed barn burner. And, yes, the judging might end up being, look, I haven't looked at a ton of reaction to the scorecard or to the decision. Again, Katie Taylor wins by split decision, retaining all of her belts. I thought that this one might have been a draw. I think Chris Mannix, the unofficial scorecard for DAZN, might have had this a draw. BoxingScene.com, their unofficial score was a draw. I was a little bit surprised by the 97-93 for Katie Taylor. I didn't see that. I did not see Katie Taylor winning this fight 7-3. So the first two rounds were swing rounds. The rounds 3 through 6 I thought were pretty straightforward. I thought that those were all Amanda Serrano rounds. In fact, in the 5th round, I thought that Serrano was about to finish Taylor. She started hitting her with unanswered power punches, and you saw Katie Taylor's legs kind of widen, where her stance got kind of stiff and wide, head down, looked like she was 1 or 2 punches away from falling back. And Serrano was coming in with the heat. And Serrano was pressing from the opening bell. She was kind of the stalker. First, Katie Taylor was moving. She might have won those first couple rounds, or at least one of the first 2. Again, the first couple rounds were swing rounds, where I really thought that they could have gone either way. But by the 5th round, Serrano was starting to land so cleanly on Katie Taylor with these really hard power punches, started blooding Taylor up. I thought she was going to drop Taylor. It's amazing that Taylor didn't go down in the 5th round. But then I thought Serrano won the 6th round as well. Not as emphatically as she won the 5th, but I thought she won the 6th. And then I think Katie Taylor kind of took over from that point. Now, I don't know if she should have won all 4 of the last rounds, 7 through 10. These rounds are pretty difficult to score, because of the 2-minute nature and the styles of the fights, right? There was a lot of back and forth, and the fight hit a level where they were both just in the phone booth slugging it out. But the turnaround came when in the 7th, after clearing the cobwebs probably in the 6th, Katie Taylor started to move and then selectively stop and fire. Move, stop and fire. So it wasn't constant movement, and she would kind of alternate between the stop and fire with the jab and then stop and fire with a hard right hand followed by a left hook, or stop and fire with an immediate check left hook. She was mixing up the attack that she would stop and fire with, but the movement was clearly giving Serrano problems. So Serrano, for as dominant as she was looking by the 5th round, was not able to reassert control from the 7th round on. Again, that doesn't mean that you can't give her one of those last 4 rounds, but it was kind of hard to. I know Boxing Scene gave Serrano the 10th round, but I didn't see that. I mean, by the end of the fight, Taylor was landing super flush in the phone booth, and they were just trading. It was madness by the 10th round. The crowd was like at a fever pitch for what seemed like the entire fight. That's the thing that's so great about this thing. It delivered more in the actual action in the fight than the lead up to the fight itself. And by the 10th round, they were just, nobody was moving. I haven't rewatched the fight, but I'm envisioning just the phone booth. And Katie Taylor started landing so cleanly with that straight right hand to Serrano's, jaw, and with the left hook. Serrano was just getting cracked by power punches. By the end of this thing, again, I wouldn't call this split decision win for Katie Taylor. I wouldn't consider it a robbery. This was a very close fight. Again, I don't like the 7 rounds to 3 scorecard, but boy, this was some tremendous action. And I don't know if they're going to run it back immediately. I don't know if Serrano's going to have to deal with her mandatory title defenses a couple divisions below at 126. I don't know if Serrano's going to do that. I don't know if Katie Taylor has to defend one of her 4 belts at lightweight, the weight class that this fight was fought at. But yeah, we'll see what happens going forward. But I really do hope that this does kickstart a more favorable trend in some of these marquee women's boxing matchups. This was a perfect night for women's boxing. Not a good night, not a great night, a perfect night for women's boxing. I mean, listen to my voice. Like I could hardly talk after tonight's night of action. Now we're going to switch over to Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevenson, where Shakur Stevenson justified what I thought were some pretty odd betting odds. Boy, it was hard to find rounds to give Oscar Valdez in this one. I mean, 2 of the 3 official judges had it 10 rounds to 2, Shakur Stevenson. And, I would hesitate to call it a non-competitive fight. I mean, but Stevenson truly did just make Oscar Valdez, the reigning WBC, or now former WBC 130-pound champion, he made Valdez just look like another opponent. It's really amazing. Valdez was undefeated coming into this fight and had some difficult, matchups. I mean, the Scott Quigg fight was brutal for both guys, but Valdez was able to persevere through some of the toughest fights that he'd been in. But he'd never been against a boxer like Shakur Stevenson. He a lot of these trench warfare, super difficult, high-octane fights, even in his biggest moment in that win, that wasn't a super difficult fight, but was a fight that Valdez was the underdog. That was the fight that he earned the WBC belt against Miguel Berchelt, the one where Valdez scores, the potential 2021 knockout of the year. I believe I had, if I recall correctly, that is my knockout of the year for 2021. But these styles of fighters that Valdez was beating were so different than Shakur Stevenson. Valdez looked like he was, trying to catch, a butterfly with chopsticks fighting Shakur Stevenson. I forgot who used that reference back in the day, but it was in relation to a knuckleball in baseball. I forgot which knuckleball pitcher it was, but the person referred to the batter trying to hit the knuckleball as trying to catch a butterfly with chopsticks. But that's what it seemed like with Valdez. And the only punch that Valdez was landing reliably against Stevenson, who was moving gracefully, just his timing was beautiful on his punches, throwing combinations at the right time, going to the body. He committed to the body attack. The jab to the body, it looked a little bit Floyd Mayweather-ish. I mean, Stevenson's a southpaw, Floyd's orthodox, but the decision, the way that he would probe with the lead hand and then turn that into a jab to the body, and the way that that would serve as a deterrent to the opponent, it looked kind of Floyd Mayweather-ish. And another thing that looked Floyd Mayweather-ish was Stevenson's ability to move without running. So he's standing his ground. He's not just getting flush out of the pocket. He's taking a step back maybe so then he can land a nice shot or change the angle and then throw. But there was just so much trickery and deception going on in Stevenson's game that Oscar Valdez, the only punch, as I was about to get to, that he was able to land reliably was throwing that quick, snappy right hand. He was hitting Stevenson with that, but the way that he was throwing it made me wonder how much heat was really behind those quick right hands. He wasn't digging into those the way that he was like the occasional landed punch to the body. Like when he would settle and dig in and try to throw like a left hook, those all look pretty hard. And a lot of the looping right hands from Valdez looked hard. Those were mostly missing Stevenson. He was hitting him with a few of the body shots, but he wasn't landing too many of those hard left hands cleanly or too many of those hard right hands cleanly. Again, he was just landing that quick right hand and an occasional jab as well. But he wasn't landing too much else. He was throwing hard, which would get a reaction from the crowd because it was a very pro-Oscar Valdez crowd. But yeah, Stevenson pretty much dominated this thing. I could have easily had it like 9 rounds to 3, 10 rounds to 2. I wouldn't even think you were crazy saying 11 rounds to 1. I don't know if I would give it that. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. Again, Shakur Stevenson justified the curious betting odds against, the A-side fighter in this case, Oscar Valdez. He had been 130 champ for longer, but Shakur Stevenson looked like the bigger guy in the ring. He looked like the stronger guy in the ring, if not punching power-wise, then bodily-wise. The way that he was kind of selectively in different spots, walking Valdez around the ring a little bit, kind of bullying him into the ropes, and then, kind of hitting out of the clinch. If anybody was winning that in tight, in the clinch type of warfare, Shakur Stevenson was winning that too. So there really wasn't a sustained path to victory for Oscar Valdez. I mean, hats off to him for going the distance. There were a couple times I saw Stevenson start pouring on the offense, and I'm like, damn, is he about to stop Valdez? And it looked possible. He knocked him down, in the 6th round. It wasn't one of those blistering, devastating knockdowns, but it was a angle-based, clean punching. You were off balance. I caught you cleanly with a kind of a short right uppercut, I believe, after getting Valdez to miss wildly and then kind of turn and then hit him with it, then kind of dropped him. It was very nice, but that wasn't like the scariest part for Valdez. It was some of the times when Stevenson was letting both hands go after changing the angle, where you saw Valdez then kind of step back, and it looked like Valdez was starting to weaken in different parts of the fight. But he's a tough son of a gun, man. Like, he wasn't going anywhere, and he persevered through a dominant loss, a wide loss, where coming out of this, you just wonder, what is the ceiling for Shakur Stevenson? What kind of an opponent is it going to require to bring a competitive fight, like rounds-wise, in terms of the score? Like, again, you could look at any one of these rounds between Valdez and Stevenson and say, well, that was a competitive round, even though Stevenson was doing most of the landing, and it looked like he was controlling and dictating the terms of the exchanges. Yes, there were times where Valdez would kind of move his way into range, start letting his hands go with some urgency, but then he would be relegated right after those bursts to then be getting outboxed at range again. So yeah, this was nothing but pushing a rock uphill for Oscar Valdez. And yeah, I don't know what Stevenson's upside is. He says he's probably going to try to win the other 2 belts at 130. It's going to require, I believe, some cross-promotional efforts. But the bigger fish for Stevenson would obviously be at the loaded 135-pound weight class. So it's going to be interesting to see how many fights between now and Shakur Stevenson fighting guys like, Vasily Lomachenko or any one of the other studs at 135. Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, George Kambosos, Teofimo Lopez if he ever fights at 135 again. Gervonta Davis, depending on what happens with his career promotionally going forward. But yeah, Stevenson is looking like I think that this win not only puts him in the top 10 pound for pound, I do think that this win does that for him. But the question is, how high up now? Is he just breaking at 10-9, or is he even like 8-7? He's got potential in my book to be a top 3 pound for pound guy. He's just going to have the right fights to put him in that position. But yeah, he's been looking dominant for like basically his entire career. And at first it was against, lower range fighters where you start your career. Then he was fighting like, slowly better guys, Joet Gonzalez, Nakathila, and then obviously Jamel Herring in his biggest win prior to this Oscar Valdez fight. But yeah, he just made Oscar Valdez look nearly as uncompetitive as the other guys I just mentioned, which is, that's an outstanding performance. I saw that there was a melee in the post-fight press conference. It looked like, I think what happened was Stevenson's family was trying to get into the press conference. I think they were either denied or disrespected, or there ended up being a confrontation between the family or the people with Stevenson. I'm not exactly sure who it was trying to get into the conference, and then the security at MGM, and it ended up being a brawl to where Stevenson is answering a question from Mike Coppinger, who asked, where do you see yourself as a top 10 pound for pound? Stevenson says, what do you think? And then he looks off, and then he drops his belt and his microphone and sees what the heck is going on. Ends up looking like a, pretty significant confrontation. I don't know how many actual punches were thrown, but it looked like it was taking place for a while. It was a pretty bad mix-up in that whole hotel area. But yeah, the fight itself, Stevenson was looking remarkable. And I am super curious and excited to see what the future holds for him. But yeah, any serious potential threat that it looked like Oscar Valdez might pose to Shakur Stevenson, yeah, it just looked unrealistic once you saw them in the ring and you saw how, I don't want to, I hesitate to call it easy, but I'm just saying on a relative scale, Stevenson looked like he knew exactly where he needed to be, what he needed to do to control the fight. And he was like smiling a lot of the times and just looked like this was, damn near a sparring session. And Valdez, you started to see his face get marked up pretty quickly. And Stevenson, again, was like very committed to Valdez's body, where some of the body work looked most damaging in the entire fight. More damaging probably than the punches up top. Stevenson was always mixing up the attack. But yeah, phenomenal performance from him. Great fight between Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. I also saw Liam Smith, beating up on Jesse Vargas, who might want to hang it up if he doesn't want to recommit full time to the sport, get back to 147, because, this is his 154-pound debut against Liam Smith, who's had, most of his career at 154. Fought, everybody from Canelo, fought Liam Williams twice, and he's been on a nice little run as of late. Liam Smith has been active, and Jesse Vargas just couldn't sustain a competitive fight against Liam Smith. He won maybe the first round or two, but it was almost all Liam Smith after that point. Even in the moments that the fight turned into a back and forth brawl, it always looked like it was Liam Smith kind of getting the better of it. There were moments where Jesse Vargas looked like he was coming on and you wondered if he was about to turn the tide again, but no, Liam Smith was putting on a very savage beating on Jesse Vargas, and I'm glad that they stopped that fight when they did. It probably didn't even need to go as long as it did, but it was one of those things where it would have required, the corner to stop it like between rounds, because there wasn't a, serious point in the fight where it looked demonstrative enough for the fight to just be called off. But yeah, great night of boxing. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.